Good evening, folks. Proletariat scumbags. It is Thursday evening and you are here for another episode of Thursday Conversation. A lot of things have been going on in the last couple of days, and that elephant is back in the room again, that elephant of the Yes campaign, that elephant of working class activism. It's a pretty big elephant, but we're not one to shy away from such things. I grew up in Pollok. In the 80s. It was a dismally bleak place. It was the top of every statistical nightmare across Europe. There were places in Pollok that were famous because the chances of you actually coming to harm by visiting them were so high. And in this time, movements started to spring up. I don't remember them exactly, but I always remember being bundled on and off of buses full of people with flags and things of that nature. I remember my granny taking me to George Square on marches. I remember being on people's shoulders, looking over like a sea of people who would all congregate to hear people speak about the issues of the day. So I grew up in that soup, and one of the main people of my childhood was a man by the name Tommy Sheridan. There were a lot of movements around, and everywhere I seemed to go, I would hear this man's voice. If I didn't hear his voice directly, I would hear people talking about him. And it was a time that's never been replicated as far as Pollok is concerned. The apathy's back in Pollok, and sometimes I wonder who's to blame for that? Is there anybody to blame for that? Or is it something to do with myself and people like myself? Anyway, the significance of Tommy, you can't really get over it or around it. There is something magnetising about him, and he is a very charismatic man. However, recently he's come to personify division, and it's a very complicated issue. One that many women have strong views on, and so I wouldn't claim to understand the complexity of those issues, nor speak on behalf of them. As a man who has a lot of personal flaws, I would never want to judge someone personally for anything that they've done. I couldn't. And I always, when it's pointed out to me, or I know in my heart that there's something that I should acknowledge or apologise for, I always try and do it. And the things I do in my life are relatively small scale. I'm not a figurehead of anything. I guess if I could speak directly into the mind of someone like Tommy Sheridan, who will probably remember me as May McGarvey's grandson. He used to write letters back and forth to my granny when he was in prison the first time. And if I could speak directly to the mind of Tommy Sheridan, then I would say, we get it. You were under a lot of pressure. Whatever was going on in your head at the time, we understand. It was a bit of an episode. It would be really helpful for the whole working class potential movement going forward if you could give us some kind of signal, some kind of gesture, whether public or private, that you at least acknowledge in some small way the consequences of some of the decisions that you've made. Nobody is saying you're a bad person. It's just that we need some kind of closure on this. And I mean, I'm no politician, but I would think that would be a pretty smart manoeuvre. You know what I mean? To just do the Bill Clinton thing and go, aye, hands up, I'm a bit of a dick, or I've been a bit of a dick, but that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It's this kind of stubbornness, it's this seeming refusal to let go of the old grievances and bad ideas. If you were to do that, you would put everybody on the back foot, including the people that are legitimately furious with you in your recent re-emergence. But that's just me. I'll say peace to Mr. Sheridan, and we'll get on with the show. Tonight, we have the charismatic, talented, well, what does she do? What does she not do? She's an activist, she's a campaigner, she's a writer, an author, a columnist, and she's actually got some quite good banter as well, as a very noisy jacket. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce the wonderful Cat Boyd. Hello, Cat.
Hiya, how you doing?
I'm fine. You, what have you been up to?
Recently we've been tightening up a lot of things with radical independence. Obviously, in the run-up to the referendum, everyone was just going full pelt, you know, get the vote out, make yes happen. So we've been tightening up some of our structures and trying to make the organisation representative and democratic. So that's what we've been doing with radical independence. We've also, some of us have been involved in radical independence, have been working on the Left project.
Okay.
Which...
Well, let's talk a wee bit about that actually, because I mean, as up on everything as I am, I'm not up on that. I'm not up on the Left project specifically yet. So imagine you were just explaining to me what it is for the first time. Basically,
it's a few people who are involved in radical independence. People like Jim Sillars, a woman who was involved in Syriza in Greece and who's like quite instrumental in creating Syriza in Greece. We got together after the referendum, people in the SSP as well, to say, well, everything that we've done over the referendum has been brilliant. Now we want a force in Scotland that can begin to replace the Labour Party. We want an electoral representation of everything that we've done over the last few years to get proper working class representation in Holyrood. Because I think there's a lot of people who are, you know, looking forward to the general election, looking forward to, do you know what I mean, sticking two fingers up to the Westminster parties. But obviously after that's done, we're going straight into a Holyrood election. And I think that there needs to be another force in Scotland.
I hear you. This democracy stuff is exhausting, isn't it? It's exhausting, thankless work. I would much prefer a more kind of authoritarian setup, personally. But that's just me again, you know. Okay, so the Left project, is this an attempt to, well, obviously what you've said, but is this an attempt to sort of create a new, I don't know, let's use the word brand, that's quite popular. A lot of movements that existed before the referendum carry a lot of baggage after it. That's why I was kind of drawn to Common Space, because as much as they're part of Commonweal, there's not all that. You don't go onto their site and feel a mixture of different emotions because of your experience, you know, you're just like, this is new, this is fresh. And I can see a potential in new things that might spring up after the vote. Yeah. Is there a bit of that in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Common Space is great. I think the level of investigative journalism has been absolutely brilliant. They've taken news stories that the mainstream papers wouldn't touch. Do you know what I mean? Stuff around like Dungavel, the hunger strikes there, and they've made it a really good story, and they've spread the word of what's actually happening in Scotland and elsewhere, of course. But I think the thing about social movements and the social movements that I've been involved in, that I think that they peak and they, like, do you know what I mean, they wax and they wane. And I think unless there's new avenues for those movements to have a new type of expression, then there is a danger that the momentum behind them dies off.
And they kind of stagnate. So it's just like, it's like the equivalent of just sitting still, isn't it? Like it's movement that gets things happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think that having a strong social movement is so important. Do you know what I mean? You can't, we've seen, like, do you know what I mean, our lives, like, you can't just go
We were both born in the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah, children of the 80s, folks.
Do you know what I mean? We've seen that you can't just go into a polling booth on election day and mark an X in a box and expect things to radically change. There has to be pressure outside of the sort of formal parliamentary systems to make sure that change happens. But I think that by the same token, you need something inside the parliament that's related to the social movements.
So it's a kind of two-pronged thing.
Yeah.
Aye, okay, so that kind of leads into what I would like to discuss is, obviously we opened up with talking about Mr. Sheridan, but that alludes to a wider issue, which is getting the right balance with social movements, trying to build popular movements, getting the right balance between creating spaces for people to express difference of opinion, i.e. division, and also tolerance and a bit of a sort of, not so much a party line, but making sure the whole thing doesn't fragment and just start shouting at itself. Because I don't know if it's a misreading of mine, but I very much like the idea that the left shouldn't have division. To me, assumes that the left should be preparing to assume some sort of political power, as if it needs to get in the same sort of shape as the Tories and whatnot. Yeah. But then I see the left almost functions better as like a means of leverage. When it builds popular, strong movements, it forces big concessions. For example, as much as the vow was really diluted and watered down, it's the result of a popular, almost popular movement forcing a big constitutional concession. Yeah. So, I mean, how does that? What is that observation?
Right.
Let's unpick that, Kat.
Well, first of all, I mean, when you look at where the left polls in Scotland right now, it's very low, right? So when I'm looking at that and then looking at other countries in Europe, I don't mean like Greece and Spain, by the way, I mean like the Nordic countries that everyone was talking about during the referendum. They have social democratic or social liberal governments, like parties like the SNP, but the left polls upwards of 10%, 12%, 15%. So surely for Scotland, we're not saying that Scotland's too right-wing for socialist ideas. Like there's a problem with the vehicle, and I don't think that left-wing parties should be designed to be like the Tories. I think it needs to be genuinely democratic, open, transparent, accountable. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that you don't have one person at the top who makes the decisions. I think that the days of the left going round and saying like, this is our revolutionary programme, you're either on board with it or you're not, that's done, and that's got us absolutely nowhere. So part of the left project, by the way, is just a space that we created because we wanted to be able to have an honest and open discussion with other socialists, other independence campaigners, to say, right, well, what are we going to do in 2016? Right, how are we actually going to make sure that the changes that we've made are entrenched in Scotland? And when it comes to, I know what you're saying about like the left being able to exert pressure, but when I'm looking at the Scottish Parliament, like the way it is now, like where's the strong pro-independence socialist force in there? And I think that not having that skews the picture of Holyrood, really.
And in a way, because of the way that the British media framed the SNP as the sole radical force, then naturally swathes of people have joined the SNP because they see that as the most radical force. And in a way, it's, well, I guess sometimes I need to remind myself, I'm like, you know, in a lot of issues, the SNP are not really that far to the left. They're maybe responding more to their support now, which is good. Yeah. But there is that danger that the more powerful they get, the more to the middle they need to lean.
Yeah, that's why I think you do need to like challenge political parties, not just the SNP, but on their own turf. And see if you take something like the Labour Party, which has turned its back on working class people, turned its back on the trade union movement, is now led by someone like Jim Murphy, then there's a crisis of representation there. I mean, I think people still want to talk about independence, right? But I don't want to, like, that's not what defines everything that we stand for. Aye. But I think if you want independence, you need to have a Rainbow Parliament at Holyrood to make that happen again. And imagine how different the referendum from the outset would have been, how different the conversations would have been if you'd had 6 socialist MSPs saying, well, the white paper isn't the only vision that's on the table. And there was a, do you know what I mean? There was a bit of a discussion about, well, what would actually be an independent Scotland? Here's an electable, credible force. Do you know what I mean? Like after the referendum that can really change things. I mean, the fact that it was the white paper that was the main thing, that was there, the main sort of manifesto, allowed Better Together to go around communities saying, you do know that's what you're voting for, by the way. And there was things in there that people really didn't agree with. I mean, like the corporation tax stuff, for example. Do you know what I mean? It's not a left-wing policy. I know the SNP have changed that now. But I think you need to have all those different visions on the table. It was all the different groups that campaigned for independence that changed support for Scottish independence from its historic levels of 20%, 25%, to the 45%, which eventually got.
The 45, I always get a kind of weird chill up my spine when people say it, because when after the vote, and then there was like people really attached themselves to that label, and I totally understood that, and I felt like a real party pooper at the time. But I was like, look, be careful, because you might think you're taking on this 45% thing temporarily, you know, to sort of harness some of the energy that you're worried might be lost after the result. But eventually this thing will become its own thing, and it'll become its own mentality. And I always feel like it makes it easier for people to blow holes in, you know, and just focus on a fervent nationalist element within the wider kind of progressive movement. Anyway, I'll not veer down that path. I was just getting my own opinion across. My own opinion is dead important to me, Kat. I don't know if you know. Anyway, so one of those movements is part of that broader coalition of yes things, yes-related things, it's a technical term, is the one that you were very heavily involved with, which was the Radical Independence Campaign. And much like many of the kind of tentpole cornerstones of the Grassroots Yes movement, not to be confused with the thematically centralised Yes campaign, then you guys were out there in working class communities. I remember in my own experience, I was out in Cranhill with Rick, and no one else was going out there. No one else was going out there at all. And ended up like 30 odd people. 30 odd people. They were very odd people. No, 30 people came along, and you know, it went from like almost being empty at the start and people being like, oh, should we have come? And I was just dead inspired by that. And I seen that you guys were engaging with the communities that most other people were failing to engage. How much support did you get for the wider Yes campaign, whether it be other groups or the sort of central official Yes campaign? How much like logistical support, moral support?
Well, there was groups that we obviously, like activists, had crossover with, like people who were in like Women for Independence or National Collective, as well as being in RIC. To be honest, a big driving force for us starting Radical Independence was just pure frustration at the Yes Scotland campaign when it started. Because they were saying things like, oh, vote yes and don't worry, like not that much will change. You can keep the Queen, you can keep the pound. You can still be ruled by a monarch in the Bank of England, don't worry about that. And we wanted to say, no, wait, we're voting yes because we really want everything to change. Like, we need a new landscape that we can fight for, like, actual socialist ideas and socialist values. Like, that was a big part of why we started it, and I think that was really important. I mean, I think Yes Scotland were influenced by some of our campaigning. Definitely. Like one of the last leaflets that Yes Scotland put out was, I looked at it, I thought it was one of ours, and it was they lied about the Warner Act, they lied about Westminster, what else are they lying about? And I was like, that's the sort of thing that we would put out. I definitely think we kind of dragged the whole Yes Scotland groupings to the left.
Yeah. You definitely created another kind of centre of gravity. That was very obvious. So, like many of those other organisations to which we refer, there is a kind of a democratisation process going on with a lot of the groups, which I personally commend and really was glad to see underway. obviously there are a lot of challenges, and there's an increased scrutiny now, isn't there? There's an increased scrutiny about various groups that people are involved in, whether it be Commonweal, whether it be radical independence, or even some of the movements or groups with a more cultural flavour, Bella, NC, and what have you. Yeah. What are some of the challenges with actually facilitating democracy within a group or movement?
Well, I guess radical independence has been really lucky because we've got a lot of talented people who spent a long time drafting and consulting on a constitution, which, do you know what I mean, it was a lot of work going into that, and it's great, and it just outlines like processes and ways for people to get involved, and it's a really flat structure so that you can't just have like one or two people at the top making all the decisions. It actually belongs to everyone who wants to be a member of it, and I think that's really important in sustaining it, that it belongs to the people who go out and build it. Yeah, so we've been really lucky in that regard. I mean, I think part of what keeps driving us on is that independence was part of the picture. Of course it was, but for us it wasn't the end, it was the means. And I think Scotland still needs a strong anti-austerity movement, a movement against privatisation and TTIP, and I mean, people still out in the streets making those arguments. And that's, I guess, what's kind of still powering it through.
Well, I look forward to seeing how things develop. In the lead up to the election, I just want to kind of dovetail some of the stuff that I discussed with the very cool Emma Rich from Engender.
She is very cool.
She is very cool, isn't she? Yeah. So we had discussed basically we'll try to have a kind of ball on deck discussion, first of all, about feminism, and second of all, the different choices that women face. And I was quite alarmed to find out in more detail that austerity seems to, whether by accident or on purpose, it actually hits women.
Yeah.
Much harder.
Yeah.
I mean, that must be like, as well as alarming intellectually, that must be infuriating in some ways for a woman.
Yeah. Aye. Do you know what I mean? It's definitely one of the things that makes me really, really angry. I think it's like since 2010, 80% of budget cuts have disproportionately affected women. Like, women are being absolutely battered by austerity, and that's because when you think about it, like, women are more use more public services. Do you know what I mean? And see, when those public services are cut back, the safety net disappears. So if you don't have childcare that's funded, for example, and that's scrapped, then the woman carries the burden of the caring responsibilities. More women in Scotland than men work in the public sector. So when there's public sector pay freezes...
You're getting a bit scary now, calm down, Kat. Calm the fuck down.
Oh, calm down, mate.
Aye, calm down. No. You're not legitimate if you're going to show some anger and passion. No, sorry, calm down. Just like, I was like, oh,
can't
there we go.
You just told me calm
She's
down.
Off. No, it's just for banter. Because I'm about to segue into something else. When I said there that you must be really angry as a woman, then that might have sounded like I don't care, or some of your viewers might think that, and I just want to confirm that I don't care. That's it. I do care. I was just trying to get a bit of banter there, Kat, but you're still very scary. So I'm just going to segue into this next part, right? The next part is when you start getting a bit angry or passionate, perhaps even a little upset, how do you deal with that when you have an increasing public profile and you're engaging in spheres where to show any of that emotion kind of delegitimises your stance on things? Have you had experience of that?
I'm not really sure. What do you mean, like...
Well, say you went like this. I'm fucking sick of this, right? You might be accused of being a bit rough around the edges, or does that not bother you?
No, I mean, I think I was having this conversation with someone recently about, like, what is it that keeps you going? Do you know what I mean? And we've been talking earlier on about feeling tired and run down and you're just leaping from thing to thing. Like, what is it that scrapes you out of bed in the morning to just keep going? a lot of it for me is anger, genuine anger, and I guess over particularly the past 3 years I've learned ways of trying to harness that and express it in a productive way, and that's me being very honest with you.
Not booting people's balls. You're saying booting people's balls is not an option? It's hard to let go of that. I feel like I should always retain that as a last resort, you know what I mean? I think we all should.
Yeah.
Maybe in a metaphorical sense, there's always the "aye, but we might boot your balls" kind of card. Anyway, I just want to finish off by kind of looping back round. This has been a dead interesting discussion, and we were talking, and we were feeling quite sorry for ourselves about how tired we are and how we might waffle and we might not get what we're talking about and all that, but I feel like we've been alright.
I hope I've not been too waffly.
Exactly. So just want to kind of loop back round. Over the last couple of days, we had the Hope Over Fear rally in Glasgow, and then there's been a lot of ongoing discussions afterwards. There's been some pieces written about it. A lot of people are feeling quite critical of Robin McAlpine for attending. I alluded to some of these issues in the beginning. I know that you can't speak on behalf of any of the movements or whatever you're associated with, but just wondered if I could ask you what your general thoughts on those matters.
Well, I took a decision during the referendum that I wouldn't share a platform with Tommy, and that's for two reasons. I think a lot of us want to build a strong left that is post-splits. Do you know what I mean? Because, you know, they always say that thing like, oh, absolute power corrupts absolutely. See, when you're on the left, that's not true. It's absolute powerlessness that corrupts absolutely. It's the constant division. Do you know what I mean? It's the constant divides between people where they can't get on that corrupts absolutely, and like, you know, makes people end up arguing about, you know, who sold the most papers or whose stall table's getting closest to the event and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? But that becomes the ultimate corrupting force, rather than having your eyes on a bigger prize, which is that metaphorical booting the balls to the people that are taking the piss out of you. So I took that decision. Radical independence also took that decision. The other reason is I think what Tommy did was wrong. And that's where I'm at with it. I mean, I don't think that one man makes a movement. I think that's a really important thing to remember.
But it's you can see the attraction. I think particularly for people who might not be familiar with Tommy, as some of us are. So it's like it's getting that balance of saying, nobody's saying that Tommy's a terrible guy, but a lot of us, to different degrees, have been through this process, and a lot of people felt, well, obviously, just no. I don't even want to kind of put words in people's mouths, but it seems like the wounds are so deep, and there's still, as of yet, not been any acknowledgement of even that feeling exists, other than it being dismissed as this cabal of people who just want Tommy out the picture.
Yeah.
I mean, are you saying that? I mean, I always felt Tommy maybe had some sort of commentary capacity, but personally, I would appreciate if he just fell back a bit. You know what I mean? Fall back.
Yeah.
You know, you've had your time in the forefront. Just fall back. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I don't disagree with you at all. Like, I know one of the women who spoke at the rally, I was saying earlier, Sheridan Anderson, to me is a great activist, you know, did indie girls like in our community, and, you know, was really instrumental in building up like a good group for Yes. And I think that there are good people who are involved in Hope Over Fear, but I think that Tommy's time needs to be over now, and we need to go beyond what's happened, recognising that people were very, very hurt by what he did, and that needs to
of the SSP as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think that needs to be taken seriously though, because I mean, I'm not going to go on a mad feminist rant, but the truth
God
is,
forbid.
I won't put you through that again. I can see you don't like it. But the truth is, like, if we are accepting that cuts hit women hardest, then unless you're taking women in the movement seriously, you'll never be able to make a serious challenge to the people that are implementing the cuts unless women are front and centre leading that. And when, you know, women are saying like that, like Tommy is a misogynist, then that needs to be taken seriously. And I just want to see good like working class representation in the movements in Holyrood that represents the voice of a united left in Scotland. And there'll be people who are fans of Tommy's, like, and if that's the decision, then that's absolutely fine. But the truth is, you can't have a united left with someone so divisive involved. And if you think about it, how influential the SSP actually were when they were in Parliament, like that, the free school meals policy wasn't an SNP policy, it was the SSP's policy.
Tommy will take credit for that.
But it shows when you have a voice of the united left that you can pull the whole parliamentary debate to your side. Do you know what I mean? That you can make those arguments if you're united for one common purpose. And I think that's what a lot of people want to build now.
Okay. This has been a really fun and educational discussion.
Intense.
Different levels of intensity, but that's good. I feel a wee bit more awake now, at least. So I just want to thank you for coming along.
Thanks
I know you're tremendously busy, and we'll bid you and your noisy jacket farewell. Troops, I mean, what else do you want to know? It's all been said here. The final thing I want to say is to my pal Ross McCafferty over at the Daily Ranger, who asked me to scrutinise you regarding some Commonweal related stuff. But then I thought, well, hang on, Common Space is hosting this and they're really supporting me to plug this, and they've not really gave me a briefing, they're not trying to restrict me. So me asking hard questions about that would be the equivalent of him asking hard questions about the Daily Record, you know what I mean? Like the ultimate difficulty, the ultimate hard question.
I'm obviously involved in Commonweal and we're going to discuss it at our next meeting.
That's the official response, Ross. Anyway, love you, mate. Take it easy. Have a good Thursday. Peace out.